12:30 to 1 o'clock after myself, we're on from 11 to 12:30 with a promotion. Now our next guests, two of them, are following in the footsteps of the Berrigan brothers and Charlie Sheehan, the Kings Bay Plowshares. Carmen Trotter and Mark Colville will be down addressing the crowd.
No more war! 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 This war in particular could provoke a nuclear catastrophe. This is my co-defendant, Mark Colville, from the Kings Bay Plowshare 7. So we spent just a little bit of time in prison, in federal prison, for going to where America keeps a quarter of its nuclear arsenal to decry all war and nuclear war in particular. Mark has written a statement. Kings Bay Plowshares have put together a statement to make, and Mark is going to read it for us.
Thank you. First, I want to thank you, Chris Hedges, for your brilliance,
Yes, sir.
for your courage, and for your truth-telling. Thank you. Today, the Kings Bay Plowshare 7 join our prayers with the global community for the people of Ukraine at this deeply terrifying historical moment. We watch with moral outrage and horror as another nuclear weapons-wielding state is emboldened to abandon diplomacy in favor of international gangsterism, killing indiscriminately with impunity, environmental destruction without boundary or responsibility, the plunging of millions into refugee status, the flouting of the very fundamentals of law, human rights, international cooperation, and the authority of the United Nations. These are the common threads that tie together Iraq, Afghanistan, and now Ukraine during this most blood-stained of centuries. They are also constitutive elements of the unmitigated evil that is constantly unleashed through the design, development, and existence of nuclear weapons in any nation or by any people. As U.S. Catholics, therefore, we believe that the starting point of our response should be to highlight the lesson of last Sunday's gospel reading from Luke, which reads in part, quote, "How can you say to your brother or sister, let me remove that splinter in your eye, when you do not even notice the wooden beam in your own eye? You hypocrite! Remove the wooden beam from your eye first. Then you will still see clearly to remove the splinter in your brother's eye." As we unequivocally condemn the deranged behavior of Russia's dictator, Vladimir Putin, and his minions, we are obliged also to acknowledge our own government's role in creating this crisis. For more than 30 years now, U.S. foreign policy in that region of the world has been pursued with a provocative agenda of destabilization, imperiling Russia's national security through the expansion of NATO right up to its borders. This project has been intensified in recent times by apostate evangelical Christian factions in Washington, which have openly admitted their desire to provoke world events that they believe will bring about the second coming of Christ. And over all of this madness and slaughter preside its silent partners, the only winners in any war today. U.S.-based weapons contractor corporations like Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, General Electric, and United Technologies, to name just a few, whose profits increase with every cluster bomb and missile launched, every body torn to pieces. For our complicity with all of these forces that are literally driving the world insane, we beg the forgiveness of God and neighbor. While affirming our solidarity with both the Russian and Ukrainian peoples, we pledge non-cooperation with any armed faction in this senseless conflict. To all soldiers we say, lay down your weapons. Your courage and sacrifice belong at the service of peace for the future of the human race, not to be spent in bloodshed on the altar of the national security state. Together we can let the words of Martin Luther King Jr. echo through these times until they shake the world back into reality. The choice today is between nonviolence and non-existence. Blessings.
Our next guest is Sarah Flounders. She's a co-director of the International Action Center, coordinator for the United National Anti-War Coalition, and she's also an author and an editor. Thank you, Sarah.
For everyone who's out here today to say no war, that's important, that's courageous, that's gutsy. And the situation we're in today, it's a perfect analogy. We're surrounded by a corporate media that's for war, that only talks about war, that only justifies the war, and we're standing up to it. And it's not easy. It's not easy, but we're here. We're here, right? We're here. And we gotta know when we say no NATO war, what that means. It's not easy. No NATO war! No NATO war! No NATO war! No NATO war! And we gotta fight racism, not Russia. 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 This is a war. It's dangerous. We all know that. But we gotta know it could end today. Today. If the U.S. and NATO would stop pumping in the arms, stop pumping in the missiles, stop firing. That is what has created this war. The expansion of NATO. I was in Yugoslavia during the war, 78 days. They tell you this is the biggest war since World War II. How about Iraq?
Yes.
How about Libya?
Yes.
How about Yemen today?
Yes.
How about Somalia, where the U.S. is firing missiles today?
Right.
Are we going to forget Afghanistan?
Yes.
These are the wars that may ruin whole parts of the world. So to everyone who's come out, it's going to be hard in the period ahead, but you know the mood is going to change, because this war will bring poverty and hunger. In Ukraine, in Russia, and right here too. Right here too. We know it. It divides people, Ukrainian and Russian, and it divides right here. So let's take courage, let's stand up, let's continue to say, no war, no war, no NATO, no NATO, no NATO, no NATO, no NATO. Let's say also, no NATO, no NATO, no NATO, no NATO, no NATO, no NATO. Last chant, and let's remember it in the days ahead. Fight racism, not Russia.
Fight racism, not Russia.
Fight racism, not Russia. Thank you.
Racism,
Thank you for the guts to be out here today. We're going to keep doing it, right?
The last time I was hanging out with Ralph Pointer was at Rocky Sullivan's at the Iraq Veterans Against the War. And Ralph Pointer is the Lynn Stewart organizer, son of a Pittsburgh Steel Union organizer, and founder of the United Federation of Teachers. He's a leading activist for the community control of education in New York City neighborhoods. He's also the widower of the late people's lawyer, Lynn Stewart.
Thank you so much for that. Good evening, my sisters and brothers and sisters. But here we go again. Once again, the world travels in circles. And this time, it's worse than the last time. Once again, the world travels in circles and cycles of war. If I can only stand up. On one of the last times, it was Iraq. But there was resistance the last time. In spite of weapons of mass destruction, in spite of Yellow Cake, in spite of Tony Blair, in spite of W, there was resistance. Yeah. Well, we're going to create some resistance here and now. For I say to you and all, where is the rush for the effort to give people who look like me voting rights? How long will we wait? Where is the rush and the effort to give New Yorkers housing? Where is the effort and the rush for a national health care system? Where is the rush to give humanitarian aid to Jackson, Mississippi and the Mississippi Delta? Where the capital of this capitalism
Michael's going to be on it.
was created.
You have a new call?
When cotton was king, and the slaves were those who created the cotton. When did they get justice and humanitarian aid? Where's the rush to support the people of Louisiana after Katrina, and still to this day they have problems, economic problems in Louisiana, and there's no rush for billions. Where's the rush for the $1 trillion make it better this time? There is no rush there. So we must say no to the billions for war. We must say no to American forcing Russia to defend itself against ballistic missiles on its border. To call for peace without a just solution to the problem is a very empty and hollow call for peace. We must say no to the military-industrial complex. Because if we say yes, we have to say no to housing. We must say no to war. Because if we say yes, we say no to war, it's the yes for the right to vote. We must say no to this war.
We love this call.
Over there.
Let Larry speak.
Our next speaker is Larry Moe from the Workers' World, veteran, war resistant activist, and community organizer.
It's not the first time some white dude tried to stop me from speaking.
Larry, nobody can stop you. You're next.
You know, we gotta come back to the anti-war community and talk to these folks and tell them to get out here on the street with us.
I'm not a cop.
Because I feel that there's some amnesia going on. People are forgetting what we've been marching against for a long, long time. The war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, other wars planned by generals in the Pentagon. People are forgetting that. I'm a veteran of the Vietnam War era, drafted a military resistor, like some of my other sisters and brothers out here, and we learned.
Yes.
We learned what U.S. invaded countries for. It wasn't to liberate them. It was to dominate them. It wasn't to free. It was to conquer.
Yes.
It was to control.
Yes, sir.
2 world wars were fought to divide up Europe and the rest of the world. And let me tell you something. This dangerous war that's brewing in Eastern Europe, it's about the same thing. And NATO and U.S. imperialism is trying to finish what it started about 30 years ago. And that's taking over what's left. Taking it all over. And workers have to stand up.
Yes.
Workers everywhere have to stand up. And they have to say, we will not allow a nuclear war.
We will not allow a nuclear war.
So that corporations can have more territory. That's the #1 thing. So when we come out next time, let's come out stronger.
Yes, sir.
I think there's somebody that wants to smash the anti-war movement. They don't want us to fight. But we're going to stand up and fight back and build a real anti-war movement or rebuild it. No NATO war against the world.
I'm here to speak on behalf of the Anti-War Working Group of the New York City Democratic Socialists of America. We fully condemn Russia's illegal and unjust invasion of Ukraine. Russia has already violated the United Nations Charter and the most basic laws of war. We call on the Russian military to immediately end their invasion and fully withdraw from Ukraine. This is the only safe path to peace. Without it, we fear that Russia's war of aggression can only escalate past its already disastrous state. Scenes from Ukraine invoked for me memories of the U.S. invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. We know how swiftly our government declared victory there, and how swiftly that victory became a prolonged occupation, which immiserated the region. We pray that the people of Ukraine will be spared the same fate. We also fear the possibility that further escalations in Ukraine could come not only from Russia, but from our own government. Unlike the people of Russia and Ukraine, our leaders and those of us descended from the American settlers have never experienced a war of aggression. And we have suffered least under the boot of militarism, and yet now command and give their voice to the biggest boot in the history of the world. It is my fear that in so doing we have come to understand justice only through the application of that boot. We hear of justice now in the economic sanctions levied against Russia's central bank, and we know the effects of this kind of economic warfare. We have seen it already in Iran, in Cuba, in Venezuela, to name just a few. We understand that the most vulnerable people, the working class, women, children, and ethnic minorities are the ones hurt most by these economic sanctions. The Russian people did not call for this war. Many thousands are right now applying all their effort to pull us back from the brink of a global conflict and an unimaginable catastrophe. We must remember these people and this catastrophe when we hear calls for U.S. and NATO intervention, direct military confrontation between two nuclear powers, has always been and must remain off the table. That includes any calls for a no-fly zone. However well-intentioned they may be, a no-fly zone would be NATO planes shooting down Russian aircraft over Ukraine. It is a declaration of war.
And our next speaker is Suzanne Ross with the International Concerned Family and Friends of Romia Abu Jamal, anti-imperialist organizer with the spirit of Mandela, and an advocate for political prisoners worldwide.
Yeah, Suzanne Ross.
She wears many hats.
Greetings, sisters and brothers. Can you hear me? Yeah. Good. It's good to be here among you. Last week I came by accident. I got confused about the date. And there was no one like you all out here. I was surrounded by people with just pictures of Putin looking like Hitler and, you know, war to Russia and, you know, hate, 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 hate. And it is really good to be with you with the Grammys, with love, and a love for justice. A love not only for peace, but we learned over the years that we can't just talk about peace. We have to talk about justice. Justice. We have to develop that kind of consciousness in this country.
I have nothing else.
That's my most important message, is really that there isn't one voice. There are different polarities. The United States is not dominating the whole world as it wants us to believe. There are definitely struggles and countries around the world that are challenging U.S. domination, U.S. ignorance, U.S. murder, non-stop murder. People talked about the 800 military bases. Who's responsible for most of the killing in this world? Who is it? Who is it? It's not the Soviet, it's not Russia, it's the United States. Russia doesn't have 800 bases around the world. Russia doesn't have the kind of wealth that the United States does and military apparatus. So, just not to go on and on.
Labor against
Jack,
war.
Dylan, help Michael. Guys, help him. Please help him.
We don't need another casualty.
For Peace.
Hello!
Fight back Bay Ridge and a whole bunch of things.
The labor movement organized in 2003 to oppose the U.S. invasion of Iraq. And we are organizing today to oppose the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine is a country that deserves its integrity and it deserves protection from aggression.
Me too.
We have to be very, very clear that what the United States has done in expanding NATO since 1990 is a terrible mistake and a terrible provocation. But I think that we have to agree with what Chris Hedges said earlier today, that war is not the answer to that. And what we heard from Vladimir Putin before he invaded, when he asserted to the people of the world that Ukraine does not exist. Ukraine is not a country. I think we have to call that out. We have to say, no, that is not correct. We have to say that the Ukrainian people have a right to self-determination, that the Ukrainian people have a right to be, that the Ukrainian people have a right to their territorial integrity and their sovereignty. The Russians need to withdraw from Ukraine. But what is the role of diplomacy in all of this? We all talk about diplomacy and negotiation. What does the U.S. bring to the table in that? What we are saying, as we develop an anti-war voice again in the labor movement in the United States, is that our position is that the U.S. should declare right now that Ukraine will never be a member of NATO. That we will not continue the extension of NATO on Russia's border. That we will take away the aggressive power of NATO from Russia's border. That we have to say that it is our position that Ukraine will never be part of NATO, and that it is our policy not to extend NATO any further. And that that we will negotiate a real reorganization of the integrity of this national collective security arrangements and architecture in Europe, so that NATO doesn't have to exist in a new architecture of true international solidarity and security for NATO. And we will stand in solidarity, as we did with the Iraqi workers, with the workers of Ukraine, with the workers of Russia, to say that the Russians should leave and the Russian aggression should end, and that we should be united in those efforts diplomatically to declare that our country will stop the expansion of NATO and enter into negotiations for a rearrangement of security arrangements in Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you.